Hello and welcome again. I'm glad to see you here. We have another book for the Georgian Book Club, and today we are doing our second Goethe with the Elective Affinities. So that's our book. But before we get started, remember there is our shop. We have books, writing services. There's also our Redbubble shop with lots and lots of pretty things. If you like our videos, please subscribe. Comment below. I'm always happy to see comments that are not trolls. And yeah, share the videos if you enjoy this. So all of that helps support the channel. Anyway, that out of the way, the Elective Affinities. This is the second Goethe that we have tackled. The first being one of my personal favourites, The Sorrows of Young Werther, which we did a couple of years ago. And this is the second. It's technically not the second Goethe I've read. I haven't actually read as much Goethe as I would like. But this one is a little bit odd. I had trouble with this. It's not a really big book. It's like 300 pages. I should not have had the trouble I had with this. We're going to discuss that. So the Elective Affinities, or Elective Affinities, refers to a chemical process that is explained in this book, wherein one chemical compound with the introduction of two new elements becomes two new chemical compounds. I think that's right. Chemistry, not my thing. So you'll have to forgive me if I've got the chemistry wrong. But in this book basically looks at a couple who are very devoted to one another, so a bonded chemical or bonded elements, and the introduction of a friend of the husband's and the ward of the wife's, who are the new elements coming in that break up this bonded thing. Though what is created is not actually as neatly as chemistry would suggest two new elements, but a lot of mess. So the wife falls in love with the husband's friend, the husband falls in love with the wife's ward, who's her niece. Chaos ensues. They are aristocrats who really have bugger all to do. They are bored, they're intellectually bored, they are emotionally bored, which is where the danger of this introduction of new elements into their society causes. There's a degree of social criticism in it, but it's very hard to actually read because there's no context to this book in terms of when or where it is, which we will get to that. This was written toward the latter part of Goethe's life. So Werther is 1770s. This is 1808, 09 that this is published. So it's a long distance from the man who wrote Werther. And I was reading it and I'm thinking, this is not a bit like Werther. What on earth is this? I had to resort to the thing that I do not like having to resort to in the middle of a book. I had to read the introduction. I don't like to do that. I like a book to stand on its own. And I was less than 100 pages in And I was thinking, why is this thing such a slog? Because it's in a very particular style. It has a narrator and it's narrated. You have no idea how much I hate that. Everything that tells you, show, don't tell. Yeah, this is it. Narrating something is great for something short. For something long, it becomes really tedious, and the part of the reason is it keeps you at arm's length. And I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, why is this thing so weird? So I read the introduction. Now, I think this could do with an update to the introduction, because the introduction is an essay that is over 50 years old. It's the essay that went with the initial translation, and I don't think a lot of people have really looked at this book particularly. I think it is a style. The way that it's written is definitely a stylistic choice, and it comes from a style of German writing that was current at the time Goethe was writing this. And normally this style was used for short stories, and this actually started out as a short story. And boy, does it feel bloated when you realize that, because it's like, come on. So it has this very particular style. And I think that the style is much like a lot of very particular cultural things. It's sort of like where it's like, it's all well and good in its own, but it probably doesn't transfer out of that culture so easily. It's sort of like the literary equivalent of aspic, all well and good if you like it, but converting other people to eating aspic is a bit hard. That's what this is. The style is a fairy tale style. It is like a fairy tale for grown-ups, and oh boy, does that happen at the end. Wow. Like, when I had picked this book up, I thought, oh, it's going to be an interesting book about a marriage and the introduction of new elements in the marriage, and a real, like, a kind of a something maybe a bit scandalous and interesting. Yeah. It's not, it is and it isn't doing that. So, a little bit of background for this. This book is written in 1808. In 1806, Weimar, where Goethe lived, was invaded by Napoleon. Goethe's mistress apparently put up a great defense of his house and property against drunken, looting soldiers, French soldiers, and in recompense of this, Goethe married her. She had been his mistress for 18 years. So she had gained this stability of marriage. But for Weimar society, marriage was more how we view marriage now. Like, divorce was not an uncommon thing. And so this is a book that is written against the background of the French invasion of Germany, of Napoleon. So Goethe had now formalized his arrangement with his mistress in making her his wife. They would remain married for the rest of her life, though apparently part of what prompts this is the nearly 60-year-old Goethe having feelings for a young daughter of a friend who was 18. He didn't act on these. I believe there was like a poetry off with another writer about this, but he's exploring, you know, his own questionable concepts around marriage, his contradictory feelings around marriage. Okay, and he's doing it in this fairy tale manner. And why is he doing it in a fairy tale manner? Well, in about 4 years from now, in 1812, the Brothers Grimm will publish their German folk tales. In 1797, Goethe had published a fairy tale, which we will have a look at some point. It's in a collection of literary fairy tales from this period in Germany. Now, Goethe is a classicist. He is very much of the French school. But with the revolution, with especially Napoleon going and invading, we all know the story of how outraged Beethoven was about Napoleon's invasion, scratching out to Napoleon on the Eroica Symphony and retitling it, but scratching it out so fiercely he went through the paper. Goethe and a lot of German intellectuals had a very similar reaction to the French, especially when they come and invade your country. Don't like the French doing that. And fairy tales became a way of folk tales, because German folk tales are very different from French fairy tales. So something like Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast, these are French fairy tales. They're very particular, and they had a certain rules behind them. We might actually have a look at some of those at some point, though they're a little bit early for us. German folk tales were literally ethnographic collections. That's what the Brothers Grimm were. They were ethnographers rather than writers, and they were collecting the folk tales of the German people. So collecting this, I guess, Volk history or Volk culture. So this culture that is in opposition to the court culture, that's in opposition to this Frankified classical culture, but that is German. And so this leads to the popularity of these sort of adult fairy tales. And so it's not actually a huge surprise that Goethe is writing an adult fairy tale. And it is most definitely a fairy tale. I mean, it starts out and it feels a little bit, oh, look, bored aristocrats. You don't have any concept of the country that they're from. They are named, they have names, you don't have really titles. So there's Edward and Lottie and Ottie and the captain, who then halfway through becomes the major, which I was like, who's the major? Oh, that's the captain. No explanation that he got promoted. Maybe if you called him Henry, I would have not got so confused. But it is very much the same way. In a fairy tale, you have very sparsely drawn characters with a name just to denote them. Nothing particular. We don't have any concept of the country that they're living in, though we assume it is a German country. We have a lot of wild, wildernessy, though it's not really wildernessy, it's 18th century wildernessy, which is kind of parkland. And so you have these characteristics that are very much like fairy tales. Problem is, this doesn't exist outside of German-speaking world. So you go into this thinking, oh, 1806 and about this, oh, this might be really good. And sort of thinking, expecting kind of like Jane Austen-y, like witty, but there are these long speeches where people extemporize things. And their character is sort of inbuilt. It's like they're archetypical rather than developing. There isn't a huge amount of character development because in fairy tales you don't get character development. They stay the same. There is a child who's born that is really a MacGuffin because nobody really cares. I mean, they care, but it doesn't really severely impact anyone to such an extent when the child drowns. There's a lot of stuff. And then by the end, there's like some miraculous healing and things. And by that point, I was just like, okay, I'm over it. I am so over this. Going from the extraordinary intensity of something that is half this size in The Sorrows of Young Werther, which is very classical, and actually Goethe in some ways mocks the romantic or the proto-romantic in that Werther becomes, as he becomes more mentally unhinged, more romantic instead of classical. Classical is actually seen as health in Werther. This one is not doing that. It's not doing that. It's going full on into German Romanticism. And I think it's a bit like the sentimental novels where except I think it's worse than the sentimental novels in terms of its modern readability. Because the sentimental novels are empathy being used like heroin. Which they were just like, oh, we can't get enough. And like, you could sort of go, oh, look, steady on. This is getting a bit cloying. This just reads alien to our sensibilities. I'm not going to say it's bad, but I am going to say it's kind of like going into kabuki theater with no subtitles and no concept of what's going on. You are going to feel lost. I definitely found the fact that this book does not have any explanatory notes at the end of it really difficult because it takes place in a make-believe land, so there's no notes to tell you about context and clues, so you're really reading blind, which is why I had to read the introduction, which I don't like to do. And I really think this could do with a new introduction. I would like to hear a bit more about the use of fairy tales in German nationalism at this time. I mean, this is still, I think we're still about 60 years from Bismarck and the unification of the German states. So it would be nice to have a bit more historical and literary context for this book. I certainly would like that. I actually found the stuff about fairy tales from another book, the adult fairy tale book that I have. So, Penguin, update your intro. Need an updated intro. I'm not sure if anyone is really looking at this book outside of Germany in terms of literary academic-y stuff. There isn't that much on that I found around it, but it's an odd book. It is an odd book. If the idea of a novel-length fairy tale kind of irks you, don't even bother. If you're curious, have a go at it. I personally, from the Goethe that I have read, I'd go Sorrows of Young Werther over this one. Sorrows of Young Werther is much more grounded in a reality. This really, the ungroundedness really threw me. I just found that a bit much. I mean, the female Quixote was ungrounded, but it was wasn't ungrounded. Like, her reading was ungrounded and unhinged, and it made her ungrounded and unhinged, but the book itself wasn't. This one is ungrounded, and it's quite destabilizing. So that is Elective Affinities. Odd book. If you're curious, give it a go. But I wouldn't blame you if you got a bit confused somewhere and decided, you know what, life is too short. Life is too short sometimes when it comes to some of these things. And with that in mind, next time I see you, I'm diverting a little bit from novels. We are going to do, because life is too short and I do not have a lot of time at the moment, we're going to do Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. Nice and short. And I think we will have a lot to talk about with that one. So join me next time when we talk blackest of black satire with A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. Until then, goodbye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.